The train car smelled of wet wool, iron filings, and the stale vinegar of cheap salt and vinegar crisps left behind by a commuter. Outside the window, the French countryside blurred into a smudge of charcoal-gray poplars and low, sagging clouds that threatened to dump a cold autumn rain over the department of Jura. On the laminate tray table, my phone vibrated, a violent, buzzing insect against the plastic. The screen illuminated with a message from Thomas, just arrived at the gravel lot by the old mill. It's empty here. Is this the spot? Where do I find the tickets? I did not reply. I watched the three small dots appear, dance, and disappear on the screen, imagining him standing in the drizzle, his pristine white tennis shoes sinking into the mud, his hair, that perfectly coiffed, expensive-cut hair, flattening against his forehead. I felt no rush of adrenaline, no racing pulse. Instead, a cold, clinical stillness had settled into my bones, the kind of absolute quiet that comes after a high-grade fever finally breaks. He was exactly where I wanted him. 30 miles from his father's warm hearth, isolated, expectant, and entirely off balance. He had spent his youth playing a game where the rules were hidden from his victims. Now he was playing mine. We had been together for 7 weeks. In the sterile light of Paris, Thomas was the sort of man who seemed designed to reassure your parents. He was 28 and junior partner at a mid-sized financial consulting firm, with a soft-spoken demeanor and a habit of checking the weather before he walked you to your door. He had these clear gray eyes that seemed to listen to you with a rare, undivided intensity. When he invited me to his father's country house in a small, stone-walled village near Giverny for his 29th birthday weekend, I had packed my bag with the nervous optimism of a woman who believed she had finally slipped past the predatory class of men and found something solid. The house was everything he had promised. A sprawling 17th-century stone farmhouse with exposed oak beams, dry lavender hanging from the rafters of the kitchen, and a massive limestone fireplace that smelled of centuries of oak ash. His father, Gerard, was a retired magistrate, a tall, spare man with a silver beard and the posture of someone who spent his life watching people tell lies. He welcomed me with a quiet, courtly grace, pouring me a glass of Sancerre that tasted of flint and cold rain. For the first 24 hours, the weekend felt like a film. We walked through the orchards, the dry grass crunching beneath our boots, while Thomas's childhood friends, Alexander and Barthélemy, laughed about old school holidays and the time they had nearly burned down the local barn with stolen firecrackers. They were loud, prosperous young men with expensive watches and teeth so straight they looked like bathroom tiles. I felt safe. I felt included. Then came Saturday night. The party in the garden had grown larger as the evening deepened. Neighbors had drifted in, carrying bottles of local cider and jars of terrine. A cast-iron brazier had been dragged onto the stone terrace, its orange flames licking at the damp night air. The alcohol flowed with a quiet, relentless momentum, first the wine, then heavy tumblers of Calvados that burned the throat and turned everyone's cheeks a bright, wind-burned red. By midnight, the neighbors had gone, leaving only the core group. Thomas, Alexander, Barthélemy, Gerard, and myself gathered around the dying embers of the fire. The conversation drifted, as it always does when men of a certain age get drunk together, toward the battlefields of their youth. They began to exhume the corpses of their school days, trademarking their old cruelties as mere growing pains. At first, the stories were harmless: the theft of a biology teacher's grade book, the hiding of a headmaster's bicycle in the rafters of the gymnasium. But then Barthélemy, his face greasy with sweat and alcohol, took a deep draught of his Calvados and let out a wet, rattling laugh. "Do you remember the elephant?" he asked, his eyes crinkling with a sudden, vicious nostalgia. Thomas let out a low, appreciative chuckle, staring into the red eye of the fire. "God, Arthur, I haven't thought about that name in 10 years. "Arthur," Alexander chimed in, his voice dropping into a mocking, high-pitched whine. "The boy who smelled like boiled cabbage and wet dog." I sat very still, my hands wrapped around my mug of herbal tea, watching the way the firelight caught the sharp angle of Thomas's jaw. He looked so handsome in the amber glow, so clean. "He wasn't just weird," Barthélemy said, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees. "He was a target, the kind of boy who practically asked to be kicked. Remember the MSN account, Thomas? That was your masterpiece." "It was a collaborative effort," Thomas said, modesty dripping from his voice like grease. "But yes, the setup was mine." Over the next 20 minutes they laid out the anatomy of a slaughter. They described how, during the damp autumn of their 14th year, they had grown bored with the standard schoolyard shoves and name-calling. Arthur was too easy to break. He simply went silent and stared at his shoes. So they decided to build a labyrinth for him. They created a fake profile on MSN Messenger, using the name Clara. To give the ghost a body, they stole photos of Bartholomew's cousin, a girl from a distant town who had no idea her face was being used as bait. Thomas, with his quick wit and sharp ear for language, became the primary voice of Clara. For 6 months, they sat in Bartholomew's attic bedroom, the blue and green MSN icon blinking on the heavy CRT monitor, drafting messages to Arthur. They told me the details with the pride of engineers describing a patent. They had studied Arthur's small, pathetic interests. They learned his favorite books, his fear of his father, his deep, aching loneliness. Thomas would spend hours typing out long, poetic confessions of love, guiding the boy into a state of total, defenseless vulnerability. The idiot actually thought she was real, Alexander laughed, wiping a tear of mirth from his eye. He wrote her poetry, actual rhyming poetry about how she was the only light in his gray world. We had folders of his chat logs. We used to print them out and read them behind the gym during recess. The best part, Bartholomew said, his voice rising in excitement, was the finale. We told him Clara was coming to the station at Rouen. We told him she wanted him to wear something specific so she could recognize him in the crowd. We made him buy this ridiculous, bright orange Elmer the Elephant t-shirt from a children's shop. A 14-year-old boy in a toddler's shirt. And he did it, Thomas said, his voice flat, devoid of any resonance of shame. He took the bus, 3 hours in the rain. He sat on the bench in that stupid shirt for 4 hours. We had Alexander's older brother drive us past the station so we could see him. There he was, sitting under the neon sign of the station cafe, holding a single damp red rose, wearing a cartoon elephant on his chest. What happened when he came back? I asked. My voice was very quiet, but it cut through the laughter like a cold draft. Thomas looked at me, his eyes slightly glazed from the Calvados. He smiled, a soft, indulgent smile. Oh, the next day we posted the chat logs on the school bulletin board, every single one of them. The poetry, the confessions, the drawings he'd scanned and sent her. He didn't even cry. He just looked at the paper, turned around and walked out. He never came back to the school. His family moved away 3 weeks later. Gone. We should have pushed him harder, Bartholomew muttered, staring into his glass. We were too soft back then. If we'd been smarter, we could have gotten him to send nudes. Imagine the leverage we'd have had. I looked across the fire at Gerard. The retired magistrate was sitting perfectly straight, his hands flat on his thighs. He was not looking at his son. He was looking at the white ash falling through the grate of the brazier. His face was gray, his eyes hollowed out by a sudden, terrible clarity. He had spent his career sentencing criminals, and here on his own terrace, his son was boasting of a murder of the soul. It was just schoolboy stuff, Thomas said, noticing my silence and reaching out to pat my knee. We were kids. You do stupid things when you're 15. You were 15, I said, my voice steady, though my stomach felt like it was filled with cold dishwater. Not 5, you knew he was sitting there. Oh, come on, don't be like that, Thomas laughed, his hand lingering on my leg. It's a classic story, it's funny. I pulled my leg away, stood up, and walked into the house. The wood smoke followed me inside, clinging to my hair and my wool sweater like a brand. I lay in the guest bed that night, listening to the ancient timber of the house groan under the wind. At 4 a.m., the door creaked open and Thomas slid into the bed beside me, smelling of stale gin, sweat, and the cold, wet ash of the garden fire. He reached for me in the dark, his hands heavy and warm. I went rigid, pretending to be asleep, my eyes wide open in the blackness, staring at the ceiling until the first gray light of Sunday morning began to filter through the shutters. I did not pack with anger, I packed with precision. I folded my sweaters, slipped my toothbrush into its leather case, and carried my boots down the stairs so the heels wouldn't click on the parquet. By 7 a.m., I was walking down the gravel driveway, the mist rising off the wet grass of the orchards. The air was sharp, smelling of bruised apples and damp earth. I walked the 2 miles to the local train station, my suitcase wheels clicking against the wet asphalt of the country road. I bought a ticket for the 8:12 train to Paris. As the train pulled out of the station, I took out my phone. It was Thomas's 29th birthday. I sent him a text, "Happy birthday, my love. I had to slip out early to set up your surprise. I've booked a private tour of the old cider distillery and a lunch at that hidden restaurant we talked about. It's about an hour from the house. Go to these coordinates at 12:30 sharp. I'll meet you there with the tickets. Don't tell the guys, I want this to be just us." I attached a Google Maps link to an isolated gravel parking lot near a ruined watermill outside of Vernon, a place I had found with 5 minutes of searching on my phone. It was a bleak, windswept spot far from any highway, surrounded by dense birch woods. At 10:15 a.m., the reply came, "You are incredible. I woke up and thought you'd left because of last night. I was so worried. I'm leaving now." "I love you," I did not reply. I got off the train at Gare Saint-Lazare, walked to my apartment, unlocked the door, and made a pot of strong black coffee. The apartment was quiet, the Parisian traffic a distant hum below my window. I sat at my wooden table, watching the hands of the kitchen clock crawl toward noon. At 12:30 p.m., the phone buzzed. "Just arrived at the gravel lot. It's empty. Is this the right spot?" I waited 10 minutes before typing my response. "There's a small delay with the guide. He had to fetch the keys from the main office." "Wait there, he should be there in 15 minutes. He's driving a blue van." "Okay, standing by," Thomas replied. "It's starting to drizzle, but I'm too excited to care." I took a sip of my coffee. It had gone lukewarm. I let another 45 minutes pass. I knew the physical layout of that gravel lot from the satellite images. There was no shelter, no cafe, nothing but a rusted gate and some dripping pine trees. At 1:15 p.m., he texted again, the excitement beginning to fray at the edges. "Still no blue van. It's freezing out here." "Are you sure about the coordinates? My phone battery is at 40%. I immediately sent another message. "Change of plans. The guide had an emergency, so I canceled the tour. But I've upgraded our reservation at the restaurant. It's a gorgeous place called La Musardière, about a 30-minute drive from where you are. I've booked the corner table. Go there now, order a bottle of the 2015 Pommard, the expensive one on the reserve list, and some of their Duc Terrine. I'm on my way from the station now. I'll be there by 1:45, on it," he wrote. "Can't wait to get out of the car. My heater is barely working." I watched the clock. At 1:45 p.m., he would be sitting in the warm, wood-paneled dining room of a high-end country bistro, the smell of roasted meats and expensive wine filling the air. He would have ordered the Pommard, a bottle that cost at least €150. He would be looking at the door every time the brass bell chimed, expecting me to walk in, wearing the dark green coat he liked, smiling, ready to celebrate his birth. At 1:50 p.m., his name appeared on my screen. I let it ring. At 1:55 p.m., he called again. I let it ring. At 2:05 p.m., the texts began to flood in, a rapid-fire sequence of rising panic. "Where are you?" "The wine is here, it's poured, I'm sitting here alone." "Are you okay? Did something happen to the train? Please answer." I waited until 2:15 p.m. I wanted him to have taken at least 2 sips of that expensive wine. I wanted him to have looked at his reflection in the dark glass of the restaurant window, realizing he was the only solo diner in a room full of couples. I typed out a single sentence in French. "Alors, qu'est-ce que ça fait quand on joue avec tes sentiments?" "So how does it feel to have people play with your feelings?" I hit send. The phone immediately began to shake in my hand. He was calling. I declined the call. He called again. I declined it again. Then came the texts, a frantic, incoherent slurry of confusion and anger. "What are you talking about? What does this mean? Is this about last night? That was a joke. We were kids. You left me here for this? On my birthday? Are you insane?" I watched the messages roll in, each one shorter, more desperate, until the screen went quiet for 5 minutes. Then a different number appeared on the screen. It was Alexander. I picked up. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Alexander's voice was hot with anger, his usual polished tone replaced by a coarse, aggressive bark. "Thomas is sitting in a restaurant 3 towns over, completely humiliated with a €200 bill and no way to get home because his car battery just died in the rain. His birthday is completely ruined. Do you have any idea how psycho you look right now?" "Alexander," I said, my voice as calm and flat as the surface of a frozen pond. "This is an extremely small payback for what you did to Arthur. Tell Thomas to stop calling me." "Arthur," Alexander gasped, the name catching in his throat like a dry bone. "Are you fucking kidding me? That was 15 years ago. We were children. It was a joke. He wore an elephant shirt to a rainy bus station because he thought someone loved him," I said. "Play stupid games, win stupid prizes, don't call this number again." I hung up. I blocked Thomas's number. I blocked Alexander's number. I blocked Bartholomew's number. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute, broken only by the hum of my refrigerator and the distant, rhythmic clack of the metro on the elevated tracks outside. I sat there for a long time, staring at my hands. I felt a faint, dull ache in my chest, the lingering ghost of the affection I had started to feel for the version of Thomas I thought existed. But beneath that there was a deep, clean sense of order. The scales had not been perfectly balanced, they never could be, but a small, heavy stone had been placed on the other side. The fallout was predictable. Within 48 hours, the mutual friends who had introduced us began to circle like crows. My inbox filled with long, lecturing emails about disproportionate reactions, emotional immaturity, and unhinged behavior. I was told that Thomas was devastated, that he had spent his birthday evening drinking alone in a cheap hotel room near Vernon, that my actions were cruel and unforgivable. To the comfortable middle-class circle we inhabited, my refusal to accept a polite apology for a past atrocity made me the monster. I was the one who had broken the social contract. I was the bitch who couldn't let a boyish prank remain in the past. I ignored them all. I did not defend myself. I did not write long paragraphs explaining the nature of empathy or the long, rotting tale of childhood trauma. But 3 days after the incident, my phone rang with a number I did not recognize. I hesitated, then answered. "Hello, is this her?" a voice asked. It was low, dry, and slow. It was Gerard. "Yes," I said, my hand tightening on the receiver. "Gerard." There was a long pause on the line. I could hear the faint sound of a grandfather clock ticking in the background, the heavy mahogany clock that stood in his hallway in Sansera. "I am calling about the list of book recommendations we discussed on Friday," he said, his voice level, entirely professional. "The ones on the history of the regional courts." "Of course," I said, "I can email them to you." "Thank you," he said. He cleared his throat. The silence stretched between us, thick with things that could not be said. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped its formal armor. "I did not sleep on Saturday night after you went upstairs. I lay awake listening to the wind in the chimney." "I didn't sleep either, Gerard." "No," he said. "I imagine you didn't." He has always had a difficulty understanding that other people have nerves that can be cut. I thought perhaps as he grew older. But some things are baked into the clay before it is fired. He let out a long, dry sigh that sounded like paper rubbing together. "I enjoyed meeting you. I am sorry that things ended as they did, but I understand." "Thank you, Gerard," I said. "Have a good life in Paris," he said softly, and then the line went dead. He did not defend his son. He did not ask me to forgive him. He simply acknowledged the rot in his own house and closed the door. That was years ago. Thomas tried to reach out to me several times over the following 6 months, using different numbers, sending long, self-pitying emails that spoke of growth and learning experiences and how much he missed our connection. I deleted every single one of them without replying. I did not want his growth. I wanted his absence. Sometimes when the autumn rain hits my window in Paris with that specific sharp rattle, I think about Arthur. I don't know his last name. I don't know if he went to university, or if he married, or if he still flinches when he hears the sound of an old MSN notification chime. I would never try to find him. To do so would be to drag him back to the wet station platform at Rouen, to make him look at the cartoon elephant on his chest once more. But I hope he is warm. I hope he is loved by someone who sees his softness not as a target, but as a sanctuary. And I hope, in some quiet, unexplainable way, his spirit felt a little lighter on a rainy Sunday afternoon in November, while a man named Thomas sat alone in a country restaurant, staring at a bottle of wine he couldn't afford to drink, waiting for a ghost that was never going to arrive.